Well, let's go ahead and get started, I guess. Week 8 is what we're going to be doing this week. So I'm going to go ahead and put my PowerPoint up and then share the screen so that you can go along with me. If you have your PDF in front of you or on your computer, you can open that up as well. But this is an interesting, very tumultuous season that we're going to go into now with the Reformations in the different countries and the Counter-Reformation. And what's all going on there. So let's take a look at that. Come on, open up. Oh, it is open. So I forgot it was open already. There we go. All right. I'm not know where Susan is. She's usually on. And Krula, Dave Krula, I don't know where he is either.
And Ann Judge.
Oh, and Ann Judge, right, yeah. So,
and Janice.
And Janice.
Well, Janice had alter guild, so she might be running late because of that.
Oh.
So. So let's talk about the Protestants in France. So Francis I, who ruled France from 1515 to 1547, supported the humanists. And he was claiming that the French church had a very special relationship with the papacy. And so he defended the Pope. But in the French church, there were those who were claiming that they needed to be independent of the Pope, and that movement was called Gallicanism. And Gallicanism essentially is a kind of a cluster of doctrines that favored the French church. It tended to limit the authority of the Pope in relation to the bishops and to subordinate the rights of the church to the power of the state. So again, here we've got and we've had this historically. We've had a movement where countries are trying to limit the power of the papacy in their countries. And so this was part of that. And so the Gallican movement has been in France for a long time, and it's resurged as well in other countries, as we'll see. It's resurged in Mexico, in Brazil, and well, of course, in England. Let's see where else there was.
Could it have been anything to do with Gaelic?
No, nothing to do with Gaelic.
Nothing to do with Gaelic.
No. The Gallican comes from the word Gaul.
Okay, all right, that makes sense.
Now Calvin, a Protestant reformer, was a Frenchman, but didn't survive much time in France because he was very sort of persecuted there because it was France was still a Catholic nation. And so he had to go to Geneva, Switzerland, and that's where he really set up his shop and did his thing there and put forth his reforms. Also, there was some Lutheran influence in France through some of Luther's writings were being secretly imported. And that became another factor in the Reformation in France, because they too got tired of the corruption of the Roman Church. Francis decided to try to use, to stop it and to use force to stop the continued spread of heretical ideas. And many of those groups were scattered and many fled from France. So the movement in France lacked really kind of any effective leadership. But those who adopted the principles of the Reformation emphasized, as always, all the reformers emphasized the authority of the Bible for faith and morals, and the doctrine of justification by faith, which was Luther's contribution. So when Francis dies, the French throne is kind of up for grabs. Both Catholic and Calvinists are trying to make claims, and Catherine de' Medici, she becomes sort of the regent and wavers between appeasement and persecution of the French Calvinists. So it was Catherine was a really Machiavellian kind of figure. And she really was simply using religion as a political tool, not as a, because she was a deeply religious person. The Huguenots became a pretty powerful and well-organized, and the Huguenots were the French Protestants, by the way. So the Huguenots became a powerful, well-organized within the kingdom, and sort of as a kingdom within a kingdom. And when the government realized that situation, there was a transition from a policy of steady, fierce, bloody persecution to a policy of religious war to restore France to Rome. And between 1562 and 98, there were some really fierce wars, French wars of religion, they're called. In 1572, there was the massacre of St. Bartholomew, on St. Bartholomew's Day. And it was begun in 1572, godly French admiral, and about 2,000 people were killed on the nights of August 23rd and 24th in Paris. And all in all, there was about 20,000 people that were killed and their property seized by Roman Catholics. The Catholics were urged to do that by Catherine Medici, who, as I said, had strong influence over the papacy and over Charles IX. In 1593, Henry Navarre, the leader of the Huguenots, became a Roman Catholic, and he ruled as Henry IV. So he would, convert basically to whatever was politically expedient.
Father, excuse me, can
Sure.
you tell just a wee bit about St. Bartholomew? Because that was the church I attended whenever I was at college, and I didn't know anything about him. What's to do?
Yeah, I don't remember right now a lot about St. Bartholomew. It was just that was the saint's day that day, when he was when the persecutions began. St. Bartholomew, let me see, I'm trying to remember right now.
I'll have to Google that one. I won't.
Yeah, I have to go back and Google him.
Yeah.
Wasn't he flayed or something? I can't remember.
Probably one of the early martyrs in the church.
Yeah.
Anyways, eventually, Henry IV, as I said, becomes king, and he issues what's called the Edict of Nantes, in which Catholicism became the official religion of France, but the Huguenots had some civil rights, but they had to worship outside of Paris and in the rural areas and not in the cities. In 1685, however, Louis XIV wanted one unified state, one ruler, and one faith, and so he revoked the Edict of Nantes. So then about 400,000 Huguenots fled from France to England, Prussia, Holland, South Africa, and the Carolinas in North America.
There's a big Huguenot church in Charleston.
Is there?
Mm-hmm.
I've been to Charleston. I never saw it there. Okay. So because a lot of them were skilled artisans and professionals in the middle class, their departure really kind of dealt a serious economic blow to France. And since this time, Protestants have been a really small minority in France with not much influence. Okay. And then he was assassinated in 1610, and his son becomes Louis XV, becomes the ruler. Okay, let's talk about the Counter-Reformation. The Catholic Church, rather than trying to, appease Protestants, sit down at the table, negotiate, talk about what do you think we really need to reform? No, the Catholic Church really kind of went into a retrenchment and a hardening of its positions. And what happened was the calling of the Council of Trent, the founding of some new religious orders, especially Jesuits, and a court of inquisition was established. So let's move on with that, and we'll see how that all develops and rolls out. So as a reaction to Protestantism, Spain becomes sort of a national leader in the work of the Counter-Reformation, because for them, nationalism and religion had been united in the attempt to unify and consolidate Spain by driving out the Muslims, the Moors, and the Jews. So this is all beginning around 1492, right? Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, they worked for a united Spain that would be loyal to Rome. And in Spain, the Inquisition was led under a Dominican, Torquemada, and he began in 1480 to exterminate heretics. And Paul III picked up the idea of the Roman Inquisition. Cardinal Jimenez was another Spaniard, and he revived the study of the scriptures among the clergy and was the first to have the Greek New Testament printed. He also led in the publication of the Polyglot in 1520, which gave the text of the Bible in the original languages, as well as the Latin of the Vulgate. There were some polemics against Protestants, Latimus and Bellarmine, and they argued that the individual believer became the judge of the meaning of the Bible and therefore has no place for the corporate judgment of the church. And I want to say personally that I think that was the biggest mistake of Protestantism. That was the really dangerous idea that has led to the multiplication of hundreds and thousands of denominations, and has really led to problems. And I fear that the Episcopal Church is moving in that kind of Protestant direction. Anyways, there was a similar criticism made by Cardinal Robert Bellarmine, who was a Catholic cardinal. And he said it's obvious, he argued, that the Bible is difficult to interpret. A fact that Protestantism has tried to conceal by following a kind of a herd instinct and pretending that this amounted to divine guidance. So that if the group is growing in this direction, well, that must be because God is guiding us in that direction. So I think that was a problem. Anyways, Cardinal Caesar Baronius, at the bidding of Philip Neri, took upon himself the research for and the writing of a 12-volume work called Ecclesiastical Annals. And it was to refute the Magdeburg Century's 13 volumes Protestant work under the editorship of Matthias Flacius, who viewed the papacy as the Antichrist. Baronius argued that the Roman Church had always been true to apostolic teaching. So, where this is a period where there is a back and forth debate. The Catholic Church is beginning to see that the Protestant Reformation is really a very dangerous idea, and begins to sort of hold try to hold the fort and fortifies itself. As a way of doing that, there were new religious orders that were being established around that time, and which really had a chance to breathe some new life to the church. And among those was a woman by the name of Teresa of Avila, who was born in central Spain from a noble family. She committed herself to converting those who were unbelievers and trying to heal the divisions with Protestants. So in 1536, against her father's wishes, of course, all these women always do these things against their father's wishes, and she entered the Carmelite convent. And she realized that these convents weren't exactly living up to their highest spiritual ideals. So she worked for reforming some of these spiritual houses. She began writing, and she wrote several books, one called The Book of Life, The Road of Perfection, Concepts on the Love of God, and one of the most famous one is The Inferior Castle. Anyways, she began to talk about the idea that there was these levels of conversion. And the first level of conversion was one of oneness with God that could be achieved through contemplation and prayer, which would result in kind of a mystical marriage, as it were, with God. And then the second level of conversion was a union to God through love, which she described as sort of an ecstasy. And you see in that statue there where she's sort of in a, you can imagine, she looks like she's in quite a sexual ecstasy there. And there's this angel there, one of the archangels, is plunging a sword tipped in fire and spears it into her heart, leaving her aflame with love. So it's quite an erotic kind of statue there. But that was what she was describing, was this very kind of erotic, union with God in love. So I think she probably would have been psychologically examined if it was today. Today's church would have sent her to a psychiatrist for some examination, something. Anyways, she established an order called the Scaled Carmelites, and the scaled means not wearing shoes. So these were nuns. These were sisters who wanted to have a more a peasant kind of a poverty kind of experience, to more deeply identify with Jesus. They were inspired by the leadership of Teresa, and they spent most of their time in prayer and contemplation. And she was declared a doctor of the church in 1970, which is one of the highest honors. Her and Catherine of Siena are the two women who were declared a doctor of the church, which means it's one of the highest positions of honor in the church. So she encouraged a lot of devotion of Catholics and opposition to Protestants. She became friends with John of the Cross, who became a follower of Teresa of Avila, and John of the Cross is another mystic and writer of popular devotional books, and he's known. Many people know him for what's called the night of the dark night of the soul, the dark night of the soul. And I will talk about that someday. We'll have a forum, and I'd like to talk about the hero's journey, which is what I wrote my doctoral dissertation on. And within that, the whole dark night of the soul is when a person goes into a very deep, dark place where one feels an emptiness from God and a distance from God, and feeling one tempted and tested, and really a kind of where is God? Where is God in all of this? It's sort of an absence of God. And this is a very normal part of the spiritual life. We have moments of what we call oasis and moments of the desert, and dark night of the soul could be described as a desert experience with God, where we're in the sense of abandonment by God. God has abandoned us. And so it's a necessary part of the cycle. And it's also a necessary part of what we see in the hero's journey, where a person leaves their comfort, their good life, and they go on this journey where they're initiated into temptations and difficulties that test one's soul. And we feel God's abandonment in that place. But then we come to a place of enlightenment and a place of comfort, and God's spirit dwells with us again, and we are enlightened, and we return back only to make the journey once again. So we'll talk about that someday. I'm really excited and looking forward to being able to share all that with you and all that. Okay.
Well, there's Janice.
Is she coming on?
She's here. She's just taking her video off.
Okay, great. So, all in all, this period of time that we call the Counter-Reformation was an opportunity for the Catholic Church to reform practices that were corrupt, like, for example, the selling of offices, enforcing clerical celibacy. There were all the abuses that we've been hearing about over the course of last 1,500 years. Was an opportunity now 15 to 1,600 years where it was not a time for us to for the church to correct those things.
Who was the Pope that was starting all this Reformation?
Oh my God, I'm just blanking right now on his name. Let me take a look at that. It was,
Because the pinnacle of the corruption was the Borgias, right? And then,
well,
but it still continued.
yeah, I mean, it was just not just the Borgias.
Right.
Let's see, it was under Charles V, and it was Paul III, and yeah, Paul III.
Okay.
Is the one who kind of initiates. But then under Pius IV, Pius IV also.
Okay.
So there was also a renewal of Catholic, or affirmation of the basic Catholic doctrine. Transubstantiation was affirmed, for example. The seven sacraments were solidified at the Council of Trent. The practice of the Mass being in Latin, everything that we think of as what was, what the Catholic faith was essentially codified there. It was not an opportunity, rather than it being an opportunity for reform, it really was an opportunity for the Catholic Church to say, we're going to reform some things, but we're going to really affirm what is the basic Catholic doctrine that we believe. And there was an affirmation of renewing Catholic spirituality and practice, prayer, contemplation. It was also an affirmation of that the artistic world and artists and sculptors and art could be at the service of theology. And so it's historians are not sure to call it, whether to call it the Counter-Reformation, the Catholic Reformation, the early modern, or the beginning of early modern Catholicism. I don't know that it was so much a Counter-Reformation. I think personally, I think of it as more of some sort of a Catholic reformation. But really, after the Council of Trent, the church didn't really change much for 500 years until Vatican Council II.
So, Father, was it Paul and Pius who really started the Reformation period, with cleaning up the whole?
It was the period when the Catholic Reformation really was beginning.
To clean up all the indulgences and all that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Began to start, reforming some of that. It was under Leo X that the Reformation with Luther began.
Well, the popes take their name. I mean, Pius.
Yeah.
Don't they take that name? So did he live up to his name?
Well, sometimes when they take the name Pius or Paul, they're looking back over their shoulders at a previous pope who had that name, and they're trying to say, I'm
Modeling after.
I'm sympathetic to those ideas of that pope, and I'm going to continue his legacy.
I see.
Yeah.
Their role model and that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Exactly.
Sorry to interrupt you.
The Catholics were so embedded with the Mass being in Latin.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, it was considered at the time sort of the ancient language and a sacred language, a language that was sort of universal and held up to be higher and better than others. And if they had suddenly started now saying, well, we're going to go ahead and allow the Mass to be in the vernacular, it would have been a concession to the Protestants. It would have been saying, okay, you Protestants, you won. So in a way, by holding on to the Latin, it was a way of saying, we have a sacred language. The Mass can be said universally in any country and you'll understand it because it's in the same language. So it was part of that universality of the church, so that if you're in Spain, Germany, Italy, France, England, and you hear the Mass, you're able to understand it and be in union with the rest of the church.
And also Latin was still being used at that time. Latin was the language of law, and it was still a lot of times Latin was used as a bridge between different countries because everybody still learned Latin. So a lot of times treaties, all that stuff was all done in Latin.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's a great
Okay.
point. Yeah.
Universal language, but I mean, the average Joe didn't speak Latin. So
No, but the educated people did.
the
The people
educated people
that were
did.
in power spoke Latin.
And
Yeah,
it was
but
a way for the church to maintain that power. See, that was what the whole idea was, that the Protestant movement was a sort of a lower class lay movement. And, you know, peasants, merchants, you know, lower noblemen, you know, and so it was a way of maintaining control. And that was what the church was into right now at that point, which was like, we're losing control, we need to affirm control.
well, who was the Pope who changed the form of service in the Catholic Church from Latin to English or
English.
whatever country?
John the 23rd.
John. Okay.
And
And that was what year? That was
he
what,
called the Vatican Council II, I think in 1962, I believe it was.
Vatican Council.
Yeah, we're going to get to Vatican Council in a couple weeks. 3 weeks, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're going to look at that. So one of my heroes, and I almost became a Jesuit, is Ignatius Loyola, 1491 to 1556. He founded the Society of Jesus. He was the son of a poor Basque nobleman, becomes a soldier. He's wounded at the age of 30. And while he's recovering from his wounds, he begins to start reading the lives of the saints and all that they've accomplished. And he decided to hang up his sword, giving it over to Mary, Mary, the mother of Jesus, and dedicated himself to be a soldier of the church. So he suffered that during that time. He's as a professional soldier, he suffered that leg wound. He became convinced that he needed to be a soldier of Christ. And so he goes to this cave in Manresa to seek God's guidance. And he receives sort of his own personal revelation about what he's supposed to do. And so he goes to Barcelona to study, and to Alcala. By the way, I live on the street Alcala, and Salamanca in Paris. And so he becomes a very educated man around theology, philosophy, and he goes into a period of sort of intense religious conversion and study. He, while he's in that cave in Manresa, he conceived of a book called The Spiritual Exercises, which was to become one of the most influential books in the 16th century and even beyond. And it contains a series of guided meditations to be used for Christian growth, and also to guide the recruits who he would bring in into a spiritual experience that would make them more faithful members of the religious order. So several of the weeks were going to be spent in meditation on sin and life. That was the first sections of the first week or two. And then on the death and resurrection of Christ. And during this long period, it would be done over a 4-week period. So the first week is focused on sin, second week focusing on Christ's kingship, third week focusing on Christ's passion, fourth week focusing on Christ's risen life. A lot of self-examination, a daily self-examination is also core to the spirituality of the Jesuits. I've done, there's a 30-day retreat, there's an 8-day retreat, and there's a 4-day retreat. I've done the 8-day retreats when I was a student at Loyola Marymount. And then I went down to the Jesuit School of Theology at Berkeley, taught at a Jesuit school for a while. So I've been deeply influenced by the Jesuit spirituality and their philosophy. So they have a very distinct philosophy about how to be a Christian, which has gotten them in trouble at times. Of course, it's gotten me in trouble too. So anyways, in 1534, Loyola gathers 6 friends from the University of Paris, and they vow to go on a crusade against the Turks. But while they're in Venice, they can't find a ship to take them to Palestine. So they decide, well, let's go with plan B. So they go to Rome and they decide to dedicate themselves to the Pope. So they do. And the Pope puts them to work with the poor in Rome and helping the people of Rome. And in 1540, Pope Paul ordained, Pope III ordains them as priests. And then they work, as I said, helping them and preaching and helping the poor. And then in 1540, he establishes them as a new order. He also enacts that the Jesuit, there will be a Jesuit head, which is called a general, also called the Black Pope, because he wears the black robe and the Pope wears the white robe. And
Father, excuse me.
Yeah.
The crusade against the Turks, were they Muslim?
yes,
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And so the head of the church would have, or the head of the Jesuits would have 4 elected assistants, who those 4 can actually depose the head. They can vote him out. They were looking for people, if they were looking for men who were robust in health, handsome in appearance, intelligent, and eloquent in speech.
Hmm.
So there was a type that they were looking for. And the Jesuits became, because of their education, let me just give you an example. For example, a Jesuit would have to go through 2 years of a novitiate, which is those 2 years is simply just working on one's spiritual life. You're not learning, you're not doing anything in terms of college. You're just in kind of a monastic lifestyle, praying, meditating on the life of Christ, reading the Gospels, reading the, and then you go on, after your novitiate and you've completed that successfully, you then go on to the university, you receive your bachelor's degree. If you don't already have one, then you go on for 2 years to get a master's in philosophy. Then you go on for the 3 years of theology degrees. So then you do 2 philosophy, 2 and 3 years of theology. And then after that is when you would start to be ordained and receive your orders. And if you're really intelligent, they might send you on to graduate school further, and you might get a doctorate and eventually teach in a university.
Always amazed though, this is a prime example of how a tiny little thing in history that it's so insignificant, it can have so many big ripples. Imagine if they had found a ship.
Yeah.
I mean, we wouldn't have the Jesuits, we wouldn't have the current Pope, we wouldn't have, I mean, just it was such a tiny little piece.
Yeah.
Mustard seed.
A tiny little mustard seed of things at the time that they probably thought was
Yeah.
a bad thing, because they were probably upset that they couldn't find a ship, and well, let's do this instead. And it's kind of amazing how a little thing like that in this, but even in your own life, how something you look back and you go, yeah, that little thing just started me down this road.
Yeah. I could tell you stories.
Oh, I know. I mean,
Someday I will tell you all the story of how I ended up marrying Estella. And
Oh, that would be interesting.
how that almost didn't happen.
Uh,
It's a funny story. It could have been seconds, and it would have been a different outcome altogether.
But
no
yeah,
regrets, I hope.
Oh,
Yeah.
no regrets, but I'm just saying, it's amazing how just a matter of a few seconds or a minute can change your life completely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
but
I
it
think-
is kind of amazing that, even in history, that little thing.
Yeah.
What's the story?
Oh, I'll have to save it for another day.
Okay.
I can't do it today.
And you'll have to clean it up now. So.
I don't clean it up. I've been telling the story the same way for years and years.
I'm being
Only
funny.
30 plus years or 40 years.
I'm being
I've been telling the story the same way. And Estella could tell you by heart, of course, because she's heard it a million times, but I save it for a time when it's, you know, I just know it's a good time to share that. But yeah, but I can tell you that it's a really, yeah, totally.
It could be your sermon for next Valentine's Day.
There you go.
Yeah, sure. I don't know if it's, I would make my students at the, for example, when I was at Immaculate Heart, it's an all girls high school, I'd make them wait until the last day of the school year, and I'd tell them the story.
Oh,
And they were like, okay, tell us the story today, right? Yeah, okay, I'll tell you the story. And at the end of the story, they'd go, oh, that's so romantic and so sweet. So, anyway,
That could be a episode after episode every Sunday, getting to know you, and everybody share their.
yeah,
Oh,
okay.
dear. No.
Well, anyways, so the Jesuits weren't founded originally to be a counter-Reformation religious order, but because of their superior education, their eloquent skills in theological debates, they, in a sense, ended up being put on the front lines in terms of the fighting the reformers. So sometimes we think of the Jesuits as the religious order that was founded to combat the Reformation, but they weren't really founded for that purpose. But they found themselves actually counteracting the Protestants and on the front lines, as I said. What they are known for, however, is missionary work. And people don't think about that, but they were the order that went to all the ends of the earth. I mean, like went to China, Japan, India, went everywhere around the world, where missionaries weren't even going to go for centuries later. Protestants hadn't even thought about going to these places. They were already doing it. They were spreading the message. I have a film, I've only seen it once, it's very sad. My son recommended it to me. I bought it, watched it. It's called Silence. Have you seen it? Anybody seen it?
But I've heard of it.
Oh my God, it's depressing. And it's about a Jesuit, Liam Neeson is the actor, and he goes to Japan to, convert Japan to the Catholic faith. And instead, he finds himself there either forced to die, recant his faith, or convert to Shinto. So he ends up converting to Shinto, and the Jesuits back home can't believe that there's rumors that Liam Neeson has folded and become a heretic and an apostate, and so they go on a mission. It's about 3 of them that go on a mission to Japan to find him, and when they find him, it's just a horrific story. It's very depressing. So, anyways,
The name of the movie again was
it's called Silence.
Silence.
Silence, yeah.
Who
The
becomes
Jesuits
silent?
were known to be so effective in what they did that the Puritans wouldn't allow them to enter the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Yeah.
I used to have a volume that was the laws of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts of 1645. Now that's 100 years after Loyola, after Ignatius Loyola. But they had a specific statute that said, everyone knows what a pestilence Jesuits are, and so if they cannot come into the province, and if they show up, they'll be put to death, unless they only came here by shipwreck, and then they have so many days to get themselves out on the next available passage.
Yeah. In fact, my spiritual director was a Jesuit. I had several. Well, I had a female sister nun who, in a religious order that they follow the Jesuit rule. So she was my spiritual director once. But my Jesuit spiritual director, John Lane, before I got married, he was my spiritual director. He ended up performing our wedding at Holy Family in Glendale in 1982. And when I told the Catholic pastor of the church, Holy Family in Glendale, that my Jesuit spiritual director, I wanted him to do the ceremony, I mean, like, he became indignant with me. Indignant. I'm like, these Jesuits, so they are not even liked within other by diocesan clergy, by other religious. There's sort of a jealousy of the Jesuits, and so
Is
you
it
know,
because of their intellect?
yeah. Bottom line, I think it's pretty much they're yeah, their intellect is part of, and they're also they've made some, they were repressed at one point. We're going to get to that, but they were actually outlawed at one point in the church because they had become so powerful in the courts of England and throughout the continent of Europe. Not in England, I'm sorry, but the continents of Europe, in the continent of Europe, that they were, you know, advisors, you know, confessors. They held political posts, and at one point, you know, all the European monarchs said, we've had enough of these, you know, these guys, get rid of them. And so they petitioned the Pope, and he shuts down the Jesuit order. Later they resurrect, but they've also been, you know, kind of, they've made some political mistakes in their past, and they've been a thorn in the side to many political states. And
But was it because of their, I mean, the education, the thrust in teaching people? Was that why
yeah,
they
I mean, yes, I mean, they had
undermining the?
yeah, they were undermining some of the monarchs. They were very Machiavellian. Some people say that they really kind of ends justifies the means, and
Ulterior motives.
yeah, you know, and so there was a sort of a rise to power that was seen, and they also didn't live in a monastic lifestyle. Their lifestyle was really the opposite of that of a monastery. And for example, in the next slide, I'll show you here down in the middle of the page there, Jesuita no cantat, which is Jesuits do not sing. What does that mean? They refuse to sing. No, they can't sing the divine office. They don't, because to sing the divine office, you have to be kind of in a monastic environment. You know, you've heard the Benedictine monks singing beautiful Benedictine chants and things like that, but that requires a lot of practice, a lot of being together at the same time. And so the Jesuits need to be always on the move, okay? Always on the move. So you've got to take your prayer book in your pocket and pray as you go, and dress however people, you know, around you dress. You know, you have also a vow to the Pope. They take a fourth vow. All the other religious orders take the regular vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but they take a fourth vow of obedience to the Pope. So wherever the Pope sent them, they were like, okay, Pope, where do you want us to go? You know, you're our general, you're our boss. And so the Pope could use the Jesuits as sort of an envoy. And so whenever they arrived, they were like, okay, suspicious of these Jesuits. What are they up to? What is the Pope really up to? How are we going to, you know, how do we receive these people? So it was a pretty, they were a pretty formidable
Proselytizing.
group of people. Yeah. So
Didn't they also get in trouble because they were a lot more, not radical, but they were more worldly, I guess is the word.
Yeah, yeah.
So that a lot of things that the Catholic Church may have thought was heretic, whatever, they actually learned it and studied it.
Yes, yeah.
They believed in knowledge, all types of knowledge.
Right, and so they weren't afraid to appropriate what was around them for the
Enlightenment.
also for use against their enemies. You know, it's like you know keep your enemies close, and you keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So yeah, they were just always at the right place at the right time, always seemed to be you know, in the right political place, and whatever was politically expedient, they believed that, you know, it was almost sort of like the end justifies the means. They sort of really kind of embodied that a lot.
Well, in a way, they were exercising diplomacy. They didn't.
Yes, they were great diplomats as well too. So and they didn't have any kind of distinctive religious habit. So you didn't know if you were, where the other religious orders, they wore a very specific religious habit, and you knew coming from a distance what you were dealing with. But they're coming at you, and you don't even know who you're dealing with, and suddenly you realize you're dealing with a Jesuit. Because so
that it makes me think that the current pope was sort of elected. There was, I don't know, it's almost like Machiavellian too, that he got elected now because of the things that the Catholic Church have been going through and all that stuff. And it's like it's almost like the cardinals when we need a Jesuit here,
well,
kind of.
he was. Yeah, I mean, there's a movie about Pope Francis I. Pope Francis, yeah. And where he was, I don't know if it was the movie The Two Popes or another one, where he, it shows his early life in Argentina.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, what was that? Was that the?
I can't remember. It wasn't the two popes. Well, maybe it was.
Could have been the two popes.
I think it was the
could
two
have been.
popes.
Right, where he's with these other Jesuit friends, and
Yeah.
he's trying to get them to move out of the poor slums there with the people, and kind of get in line with the powers of the state. Anyways, and so they saw him as sort of as a traitor, and
Yeah, that was the two popes. I
that
think.
was the two popes. Okay, yeah, it's worth watching such
was
scene
fantastic.
there, where he's trying to get his fellow Jesuit brothers to toe the line, as it were, so that they don't get into trouble and they don't get killed. And eventually they do get killed because they don't. And so he was seen as a sort of a traitor by some people. But you can see in his activity in Argentina, and you can see also in the things that he has said recently that have made it into the press, that he is sort of going counter the Vatican culture. The Vatican has always been a very conservative body,
Right.
of clerics there who have fought reform and have resisted. You have popes that want to come in and reform and clean things up. Well, they can't do it because the Vatican has become this very entrenched bureaucracy.
That's why and so to me it seems like the College of Cardinals were kind of Machiavellian in that they put a Jesuit in charge because they do need to have things cleaned up, and it's been unsuccessful in the past. And so it's almost like if you put a Jesuit in charge, it's so radical and so different that, so it almost seems like like there was something in the background going on in the College of Cardinals that put him up there. It's just kind of.
But the Vatican sort of portrays this great wealth. I mean, and Pope, the new Pope, he is all for the poor, and sort of it's just.
Well, the Vatican's wealth is it's like the royal family's wealth. It's in property. It's in things they can't sell. I mean, you could say that they have millions and millions and millions of money, but it's in churches. It's in things they can't sell because they're priceless. So I mean, they have money, but I don't think they're as rich as people think.
My Jesuit church history professor used to say, if the Catholic Church liquidated all of its assets, everybody in the world could have a Big Mac for a day.
Yeah.
But that would be it.
Because a lot of the things that they have, they can't. They're priceless. They can't sell. I mean,
the churches throughout the world are dripping gold. I mean, gold altars and gold this.
Yeah, but you can't sell that stuff.
Yeah, but
who would buy it?
Well, if it were liquidated,
it's priceless.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You can't sell it. So it's useless to say that they have all this money because it's money they can't use.
Yeah. So now the Jesuits today, I can speak about the Jesuits because I know a lot of Jesuits, and I almost became one, and was very intimate with their work and their apostolate. Today, a novitiate is done in maybe East LA, and the Jesuits novitiates are working with the poor. They have sold a lot of their California beachside properties. I lament the fact that they sold the beach house in Montecito, where I had my spiritual experience, but it was in Montecito, across from the beach, next to the Biltmore. I'm sure they got millions of dollars for that, but so that's where the novitiate used to be there, and in Upper Santa Barbara, up in the hills about 5 miles from there. And they sold their seminary and it's become now the Pacifica Graduate Institute, I think it's called, where they offer graduate degrees in Joseph Campbell studies and mythology and dream and all kinds of things. But that was that was the seminary where I had gone for a retreat, and where I would have gone if I had been a novitiate there. But they've sold some of their properties, so they're kind of saying, hey, we've entered the modern world. We're not about what we used to be back in the 16th century and all that. We're different now, and so their apostolate is still today. Universities, of course, we know many of them around the country, the Loyolas, the Gonzagas, Boston College, everywhere. What are some other ones I forget right now?
What's Notre Dame? Notre Dame. What's
What?
Notre Dame? What's Notre Dame?
Notre Dame is not a Jesuit school.
I didn't think it was, no.
Yeah, no. So there's in Louisiana one, there's in Chicago, Loyola Chicago, there's Boston College. Fordham, I think, is Jesuit.
Isn't there one in Washington, Georgetown? No. Jesuit?
Yes. Georgetown.
Yeah, Georgetown.
Georgetown.
That's connected to Loyola. But what is Notre Dame?
I don't know. I don't know what they're connected to, who they're connected to, But so education, colleges, universities. So they have also, think about this, they have educated some of the most top people in the world. So, even Fidel Castro went to a Jesuit high
Wow.
school. What does that tell you? So they have educated some of the top people in the world. They have endowments that are amazing. Loyola High School, where my father, when I was in high school, I was offered a full scholarship at Loyola High School. And thanks to Donna, my spiritual surrogate mother, who taught there at Loyola High School, got me a scholarship. And my father foolishly said, no, I'm not taking any charity. So you got to go to the public school. So,
oh dear.
Yeah, I would have gone to a Jesuit high school, and so, but that's my father for you. Anyways, so they still do a lot of missionary work, a lot of education work. The thing about being a Jesuit is the idea is that you are not trying to find a cookie cutter mold. Unlike the Franciscans who want to be like St. Francis, like Jesus, the Jesuits are all about who are you, what's unique about you, and go out into the world and be that unique you.
Oh.
Okay, so it's not about like being like some other saint. Let's discover who you are and you utilize your talents, your gifts in the world for the sake of the greater, for the greater glory of God, ad majorem Dei gloriam, for the greater glory of God. And so you'll go to like I used to go to cocktail hour on at the Jesuit residence at Loyola, or at the Jesuit at the high school, Loyola High School. And in the study, they were all, we're having drinks. And one Jesuit over here works at a hospital, one's a therapist, one's a psychiatrist, one's a scientist, and some teaching high school. They've got all these different professions that they're doing in the world, and they also are a Jesuit. So they can combine a secular career with their being in the religious order. And that's a very unique, distinctive way of being in the world as a religious. And so, the idea is to discover who you are and then live that who you are into the world for the greater glory of God. And that's very different than Dominicans who want to be more like Dominic, Franciscans who want to be more like Francis, Carmelites who want to be like Teresa of Avila. You know, all these different religious orders all have an exemplary saint who they all want to aspire to be more like. Whereas there is no I want to be like Loyola. No, there are no other Ignatiuses that we're trying to create here. You know,
Believed in individual freedom, so
exactly.
individual thought and whatnot. By the way, Holy Cross was Notre Dame.
Okay,
Oh, yes, Holy Cross, that's right.
so those are some of the unique ways. You know, their spirituality is unique. Their spirituality is very much about discernment. And so part of what the spiritual exercises are all about is to give the person who's doing the exercises, is to help them to discern what direction their life should go in. Where is God calling me in my life? Is God calling me to be a priest? Is God calling me to be married? Is God calling me to do this, to do that? It's really a time of inward retrospection to discern. And one of the ways that one of the principles that Ignatius would give people is that if you want to make a decision about something, make the decision in your mind first. Okay, I've decided to do this, and live out that decision in your mind. And if you receive consolation and peace as a result of that, if you experience that, that's a good decision. If, however, you experience conflict and emotions and negative and sadness, or, you know, a disruption of the spirit, you know, that could be telling you that's not the decision I want you to make. So it's a kind of a very experiential, and the style of spirituality I would describe is using one's imagination. Imagine yourself in this position. So when you're reading the scriptures, as in the Jesuit spiritual approach, you imagine yourself in the story. You are one of the characters in the story, and you're asked to then dialogue with the people in the story. Are you Jesus? Are you the woman at the well? Are you as for example today, you know, we had the three slaves or servants, you know, the parable of the talents. Imagine yourself as that wretched, you know, third, you know, servant who, out of fear, doesn't invest the master's money, and you know, what are you then? And then after you've experienced the story in your imagination, then what insights do you receive as a result of that of that experience? So, and
Since they didn't have a monastic, you know,
no,
they I mean, they were all priests, right?
no, you could be a Jesuit brother.
A Jesuit brother, okay.
You don't have to
But
be
did they have to have sort of a secular job to support themselves?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, it's just a matter of like, do you feel called to be a physician? Okay, great. Be a Jesuit physician.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, so I mean, that's why I'm saying you'll find, for example, if you look at a book of Jesuits in my theological library here, if you look at the picture of them in the back, they're wearing a suit and tie.
Right.
They're not wearing a collar. Karl Rahner, I can't even find a book of Karl Rahner, who was one of the greatest Catholic theologians. And every picture I've got of him, he's wearing a suit and a tie and a jacket. You know, it's interesting. But yet, the typical Jesuit on a campus, a college campus, in the past used to always wear a cassock. Now, the cassock for the Jesuits is different than the Roman cassock. Again, they got to be different, right? So, for example, The Jesuit cassock looks like the Anglican cassock, the one I wear, where you have one button that comes across, like a panel that comes across, and then you button at the shoulder. The Roman cassocks, you have buttons all along the front, all the way down to the bottom, from the neck all the way down to the bottom. That's the typical Roman cassock. But the Jesuits had to do it a different way. So they got their own religious habit that they wore, that later on that they developed to wear in the university. So you can tell a Jesuit by those cassocks. And more the Jesuits today are wearing the cassock a little bit more. But at one time they'd gotten rid of all the cassocks. You rarely saw a Jesuit in a collar. They were just, they were trying to just become more modern in the world. And anyway, so enough about them. I could go on to talk about the Jesuits.
But today, Father, they're much more revered than they
Oh yeah,
used
well,
to
they're
be.
always been revered, but today they're revered because of the Jesuit
Their influence.
universities, their
Yeah.
work, their sacrifice. They're not revered, but they've shed all of they've learned their lessons from the past. They came, after they were repressed, shut down, and then reinstated. They sort of learned their lesson and became much more spiritual, servant kind of order. But they're known for having educated, some of the top people in the world. For example, there's a Jesuit high school in Cuba that educated the elite of Cuban aristocracy, and when I was in Miami, those Jesuits that had the high school in Cuba founded a Jesuit high school in Miami, same name as the one in Cuba. And some of the top, and I wanted my son to go there when he was in high school. We went to the parent tour at the Jesuit high school there, and he said, "Dad, this isn't for me," And I was like, "Oh God, I would have given anything to come to the school because it was just so, strongly academic, but he didn't want to go there because it was just too much, too hard, and but they have educated, the doctors, the lawyers, the politicians in almost every major country in the world. They are known and respected, and they've endowed. Oh, I was going to say about the endowments. Loyola High School in Los Angeles has an endowment such that any student, regardless of their ability to pay, can go there. If they academically meet the standards, the Jesuits will pay for their whole 4-year education there. So that's because all the elites of Los Angeles and around all that they've educated, all these men around the world, they've continued to contribute money to the high school, and so they've built up a superb endowment there that they can afford to give scholarships to everybody. In fact, they could continue. They could make the school tuition free. Like Harvard could make the school tuition free, but you think Harvard's gonna do that? No, because Harvard was founded by Protestants. So
Do the students have to be Catholic?
no, not Catholic schools don't require students be Catholic.
Did Harvard used to be totally Protestant?
Yeah, right. Yeah, but they've shed all their. I mean, there's Harvard Divinity School. It's a very liberal, Protestant seminary, but it's not affiliated with the. I think the Puritans. No, I don't think I forget who founded the Harvard. Maybe you could Google that.
Yeah, I almost went to a Catholic school because it was just the closest school to my house.
Yeah.
But it was all-girl Catholic school, and I
Yeah.
wasn't gonna go.
Yeah, there you go. So my slide there, on the slide there, the third bullet point there, a lot of famous Europeans were educated by the Jesuits, Descartes, Voltaire. And even, like I said, even Protestants attend. There you go. Fourth bullet point there. Jesuits have had their own kind of philosophy about education too, which we won't get into because there's no time for that.
The Massachusetts Bay Colony started Harvard.
Did they? Okay, I wasn't sure because the presentation I made last night, I did talk about the founding of universities by the Puritans,
Yeah.
in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, but I didn't see Harvard. They founded Brown, Dartmouth founded Yale, Brown.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's got a religious, I mean, it just says the mass, but it doesn't seem to have a religious beginning.
Yes,
Yeah.
math, the Puritans.
Pr-
So as I
Princeton-
said, the Jesuits went on mission trips to China, Japan, North America, South America, and beyond. You know, it would take hundreds of years before Protestants even decided and caught on to that whole idea. By 1556, there were less than 1,500 Jesuits. By 1556, less than 1,500. By 1626, only about 70 years later, there were 15,544.
Hmm.
So they grew just in exponential numbers. One of the most famous Jesuits was Francis Xavier. He traveled to India, then to Japan. At his death, there were 1,000 Jesuits in Europe, South America, Asia, and Africa. So missionary work was their big thing. And there again is the work of the Jesuits, the origins, Ignatius, spiritual exercises. They worked like an army. Their works were preaching, spiritual exercises, deeds of charity, schools, colleges, and the mission work. That was their big contribution to the Counter-Reformation. Boy, I got a lot of slides on the Jesuits, don't I?
Yes, I think you like the Jesuits.
I guess I like the Jesuits. I guess I got a lot of slides on them. Okay. Well, if the book, Gonzalez must like them too, because I mean, Gonzalez spent a lot of time, and the slides are all based on what he was asking us to read and do. So again, they were influential in bringing back the Protestant regions, solidifying the faith of Catholics. As I've said, the missionary zeal. They were very influential. In fact, in winning Protestant regions back to Rome. I think they went to Poland, and they were able to win Poland back to the Catholic Church. So they would go into these Protestant areas of Europe and win back the people, and that's why they were sort of like stay out of Europe. So
Was Poland Lutheran at that time, or what?
who?
Was Poland before
Well, it was sliding towards Protestantism.
Oh,
Yeah, it was sliding towards the Protestant church, and so the Jesuits went in there and they saved Poland, and they made it one of the most zealous Catholic countries. And
Yeah.
of course, John Paul II was, Cardinal from
yes,
Poland.
he was.
Karol Wojtyla. So they really they really shaped modern Catholicism. They were a tremendous force.
They were proselytizing throughout the world, right?
Yep.
So,
Again.
so with this type of movement and the Protestant movement in the West, well, did the Roman Church, do you think, evolved away from the Eastern Church?
Did the Roman Church evolve from the Eastern Church? Yes.
Yeah.
During all
And
this
so
time.
that has to be going on through all of this.
Yeah, all this time, the Reformation, the Counter-Reformation, all continued to move the Western Catholic Church in its own trajectories and directions, whereas the Orthodox churches in the East were not affected at all by the Reformation, were not affected in any way by what was going on in the West. That's why they are still doing things the way they used to do it 2,000 years ago. They don't think anything modern. And they have no modern theologians who don't say, let's look back 2,000 years ago and say what were they saying and thinking back then. What's his name here? I've got his book. Christos Ware. He's called Christopher Ware. Anyways, former Anglican, became an Orthodox, became a church historian for the Orthodox Church. When these Orthodox historians and theologians talk, they're talking about what did Basil, what did what did the early theologians in the first 400 or 500 years of the church believe and think. That's what we're going to believe and think today. There is no modern theology. There's been no modernization in the Orthodox Church. The Orthodox Church is what it was in the past, and in the present and in the future will be the same. There's no modification. There's no reformation needed. What was ancient is good. What is, and that's why for the Orthodox, we look at the Roman Catholic Church and they go, you guys have been innovating and innovating and innovating and changing and changing and changing. And we are just doing things. We're worshiping the same way. We're thinking the same things. Our theology isn't changed. For an Orthodox, when you study theology, you don't study whatever somebody's writing about today. You write about, you read what the early church fathers, wrote and thought about.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. No need to fix it.
Yeah, that's kind of their philosophy. It's not broken. Why are we going to fix it? And why do you think, and who are you to be fixing things? What do you think? So anyways, I'm close to the end, I think.
10 more minutes.
We got these papal reformers, and I quote reformers. They all tried, all these guys, they all tried to reform the church, from Leo to Paul III, Paul IV, all these, the two between Paul III and Paul IV. Paul, yeah, were very short-lived popes, but they all try to be reformers, and they were largely ineffective, and they were really half-hearted in their reformed attempts. Leo was preoccupied with the Lutheran affair. Adrian tried to start some reforms, but he dies 13 months in. Yeah, right. He's Clement is this great patron of the arts, and but he's part of the Medici family, so he really doesn't really do anything in terms of trying to attempt to reform the church. He had no sense of urgency to do that. Paul III, he sort of does tries to do some reform, is an unlikely reformer, because he's really trying to just put people who are related to him into office. He has a mistress who bore him 4 children, and he looked at the church as sort of this fortress that had to be defended and guarded and just stay alert. So no reform there. Paul III, he reinstates the Roman Inquisition, going after heretics. He says any public criticism of the church is dangerous. He approves the Jesuit order in 1540. He convenes the First Council of Trent in 1545. There's bribery in high places under him. There's abuses of papal power. There's laxity in the monastic orders. There's the abuse of the indulgences. There's a high number of prostitutes in Rome under his time. He convened a commission to assess the church and its needs. He criticized the papacy for exaggerating claims to power, but that didn't stop him from exercising, tremendous power. So, just to put it short, he's a failure in terms of reform. So Paul III calls this council, which is a good thing. And he's hesitant, and many of the Pope bishops and cardinals are hesitant. Even the popes, even the cardinals surrounding Pope John XXIII, who called Vatican Council II, they were trying to stop him from calling the Vatican Council II. They were actively trying to stop him from doing it, but he persisted in doing it, and eventually it was, and it changed the Catholic Church. So the purpose of the Council of Trent was to uphold Catholic doctrine, reform practices. There were 25 sessions for the Council of Trent, spanning 3 different popes. And again, the Jesuits played a very major role at Trent, and helped define Catholic doctrines in opposition to Protestant views.
Where is Trent, by the way? Where was
Trent is in northern Italy, southern Germany, around that area.
Oh, okay.
It's north of Italy, north of Rome, but south of the south of southern Germany, like near, I think it's near like the Alps or something, right, Cindy?
Let me look. Trent.
North of Rome.
No, it's not a Trent.
One of those Yugoslav countries.
No.
They did it in a place that was sort of central to where bishops could come from a variety of places.
Trento in
Trento.
northern Italy. In Trent is the Trento.
Yeah, northern
That's
Italy.
why I couldn't find it because it's called Trento,
Trento, yeah.
Okay.
and it's
Sorry for interrupting you.
No problem.
it's in the Alps.
Yeah, Alps, that's what I remember. So
I have it in mind. I have it in mind that the Jesuits were somehow associated with the Spanish Inquisition.
no, the Dominicans were.
The Dominicans, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the key theological statements that they made at Trent was that it was scripture, yes, but also tradition. What we have been thinking, believing, and doing over the course of centuries is also part of the revelation of God. That is, God is acting through the church, giving us revelation in both scripture and tradition. So scripture and tradition need to agree. Tradition can't contradict scripture, but if something's not in scripture, but yet we've been doing it in tradition, and it's helpful to the church and it's the faithful, then it's okay. Whereas the Protestants were only scripture. Throw out tradition, throw out the baby with the bathwater. Okay, so
Which is, the Episcopalians believe in this scripture and tradition.
yes, Richard Hooker added the idea of reason. Tradition, tradition and reason, but keep in mind that with what Hooker and the Anglican tradition is that tradition and reason are there to support scripture, to interpret scripture better. It's not three different sources of revelation, okay?
Exactly.
Which is a big misunderstanding by Episcopalians. You know, and many Episcopalians have been adding experience as this fourth thing, which is ridiculous. It doesn't exist anywhere. It's, you're inventing that my experience tells me, oh, I'm sorry, but
That's Wesleyan. That's Wesleyan.
yeah, that's Wesleyan. But in the last, 20, 30 years, I'm hearing Episcopalians talk about experience more, and that's just not.
No, it's more tradition. And
God is an experience, though, in that sense, in the sense that you experience God through many people have many different types of experiences that introduce them to God.
Yes, but they have to be tested. But those experiences and your reason need to be tested against scripture.
Okay.
Not to replace scripture. Scripture is still at the top.
They supplement, they bring you to it.
Yes, they're supposed to support and help you understand scripture better.
It's a three-legged stool.
Well, but again, three-legged, the other two legs are uneven.
Yeah. But
the higher leg is scripture.
Yeah, you can't have one without the other is what, I think of, because if you have one without the other, then the stool is going to fall over, kind of thing. It's a lopsided stool, but you've got to have all three legs.
So when I was at a sort of a youth retreat type of thing, we used to take our kids down into Appalachia, where the people that ran the program were kind of evangelical, and they went on 4 legs. They had scripture, tradition, experience, and prayer. And they gave you they bring the kids in and they give them pipe cleaners, and they'd say, make yourself a square that where each one represents the length of this stuff in your own mind and your own faith. Of course, the kids were a little bit like, what?
Yeah.
I'd be making a triangle. It's the Trinity.
The rest of us really took it's funny. I think I still have my little twirly thing, and but I look at it. If I look at it on a different day, I might make things a different length. So. But these kids were mostly, they were, I think the program was started by either Lutherans or Methodists, I'm not sure. But because the Appalachian Mountains is so evangelical, a lot of the people that wind up running the program were very evangelical. It's a great youth experience, though.
And that's great for one's personal religious life.
Yeah.
Perfectly okay. What that would not be the way the church, the Anglican Union, the theologians, the bishops, the the people, when we have a contentious theological issue, we don't say, well, what does my personal experience tell me? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I
Now,
got you.
it can feed in the dialogue, in the discussion, in the debate, but with a true Anglican perspective would be, okay, Scripture tells us this. How does my tradition, how does my reason, and how does my own experience dialogue with that?
Yeah.
Dialogue with that, and can we then, out of our reason and experience, find a understanding of Scripture that helps us resolve this issue, this problem, or elucidate this issue. But yeah, I mean, I'm all for God being in my experiences. I mean, that's, my whole life is built on that. But at the same time, the Catholic Church said we can't define doctrine based on what you believe or what you believe. There has to be a consensus, and it has to be by the appointed leadership, the apostolic leadership of the church, called the magisterium. Okay, and the magisterium is, by the way, is not just made up of clergy. It is made up of lay theologians as well, who are part of this teaching commission, teaching authority. And the magisterium's job is to, okay, you've written this book, you've got this theological position, let's discuss this. Let's debate it. Let's look for the holes in it, or let's look for the strengths in it, the weaknesses. And then if it needs to be modified, it's modified. And at the end of the day, it's the magisterium that puts forth the position. It's not the individual theologian. It's not the individual person or Christian that says, this is right, this is wrong. And that's the Protestant experiment that is dangerous, which is that every individual, the seven of us that are right here gathered, can each of us look at a piece of Scripture and decide this is what it means. And if you don't agree, well, then you can go out and found your own church, and find another group of people who will agree with you. 10, 12, 14, you can start a church, you can build a building, you can call yourself whatever you want to call yourself, and you now have another Protestant denomination. And when it's the individual is left to be the sole interpreter of Scripture, that's a problem.
Well, if you think about the history of how the Episcopal Church and other Protestant churches have come to accept gay relationships as relationships sanctioned by Scripture and in love, that was, to me, that was an evolution of experience. That because there certainly is nothing in Scripture that says gay is okay.
There's nothing in Scripture that says gay is not okay. That's
exactly it. That's exactly it. So
yeah.
But the point is that it was a 20th century, 21st century phenomenon of experience in society that brought that question to the churches. And so they had to look to Scripture and teaching and what have you, and to discover exactly what you just said, Cindy. There's nothing that says it's not okay.
But there is a basis of, Jesus preached about love one another as you love yourself. And
right.
So, in other words, do we have the right to exclude people? No. And so there is a basis in Scripture for that.
Right.
But I wouldn't necessarily say experience, because it's more along the lines where we say reason. The Episcopal Church has changed over the years because laws have changed. And so, it's kind of reasonable that the Episcopal Church would change too. We like to think about things, but we still look to Scripture to have a basis for it. And and the thing is in scripture, there is nothing that says, that you should discriminate against people in that way. Jesus said, love one another. So, I mean, to me, that's
And
what
he also said that love was one of the most important commandments.
exactly. And nowhere does it say, I mean, in the Old Testament, there's some weird stuff, but, nowhere did Jesus say, love these people, except, because he loved the Samaritans. He loved the outcasts. So, and so
that was the entire thrust of his teaching.
exactly. So for us to acknowledge the outcasts, the society's outcasts, the LBGP community, it goes with scripture, I think. That's my theory.
It's still, as Father Munoz said, it's still reason and
Exactly.
and tradition, and then bring experience in if you're Wesleyan, directing you to reinterpret the scripture in a way to support doctrine.
But I mean,
and when you start sorting through all the holiness laws or the laws of the Mosaic laws, however many commandments there were, obviously we didn't. I mean, Moses did not, go to church on Sunday and sing, Rock of Ages, and we do. So what happened? What happened? Change has been, one thing that's sure. But locking in the mores and customs and social structure of the Bronze Age is not what we need to do. But you still have to go through and kind of sort through these things, because some of it, obviously, you don't murder. We support that, but that's part of the Mosaic law. You don't steal. We support that. That's part of the Mosaic law. But we don't cut birds in half and walk between them in order to seal contracts anymore. And that's what the Mosaic law said you should do. Exactly. So we've obviously moved, but we're kind of sorting through those things to decide what is valid for us, what is as a matter of faith, and just a matter of the culture and mores of the time.
Yeah.
And that's the hardship that a lot of people have had, is they kind of look at it as situational. You toss out this, you keep that, and it all depends on what your views you come to the doctrine with, and the prejudices and the malice and everything else you might come, and your own personal experience. And so it's all explained really in the three-legged stool of scripture with tradition as interpreted by tradition and reason. And even St. Augustine said, if your interpretation of scripture puts you in direct conflict with what you know about the physical world, okay, reconsider your interpretation.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a matter of throwing it out or just saying, well, we're the church of what's happening now. We've decided, we're just going to dump all this stuff and call it Christian or call it biblical, when it's, you have to go through that process. And I see the Episcopal Church going through that process, as all other churches are, many others. It's not, but the battle is not so much between denominations anymore as it is between the fundamentalist groups within any denomination and the more progressive ones. That's where the fight is now. That's where the splits are. That's where the churches separate and split off and those kinds of things. So it is a struggle, and it's a constant struggle.
Yeah.
And
well,
the fact that
go ahead, Eve. Go ahead, Edna.
The fact that the Pope has taken a side there, there is a little crack in the whole fabric right now, don't you think?
Yeah. Well, he's a progressive, but also too about the experience and the reason. You can have reason and not have experience. So like for instance, the LBGT, somebody could say, you know what, I don't believe that people should be considered second-class citizen or in the church, or also, and they may have absolutely no experience whatsoever in, they might not know anybody who's gay. They might not have that experience, but they have the reason that they know that this is probably wrong. So that's why reason, I think, is more, different than experience.
Reason is not the same as experience.
No, because you can have reason without the experience.
Yeah. And actually defending the Latin, the Latin language is during the medieval church and the early church, people weren't educated at all. I mean, most of them were not even literate in their own language, let alone in another. So it was the educated clergy that preserved the scripture. It's the educated clergy that copied it down. It's the educated clergy that developed the mass. It's the educated clergy that preserved the ancient writings of the Greek and Roman and the ancient East for people to look at later on. So, and they kind of had a grip on interpreting the scripture because they had the education to do it. They knew the history, they knew the translations, they knew the language, all those kinds of things.
And kept people in submission, the uneducated.
Well, sure, but it was kind of a necessary thing. It wasn't just oppression. Let's keep them stupid so we can control them. That was just what they were presented with. And yeah, there was a lot of that too, and there was. But one of the things about when the Bible became available in the vernacular, it was now available to people who were basically uneducated, might not be just now learning how to read, and the only way they knew how to take it was literally. The only way they knew how to read scripture was literally, and that will give you some pretty silly stuff and probably cruel things that you can read. At least the educated clergy had the background to be interpreting scriptures in different ways. So that's kind of the baby with the bathwater. I'm all for the vernacular. I think it was a great improvement. I think Islam needs to go through that. It will be a great awakening when they're no longer tied to the Quran in classical Arabic, because right now no translation is really recognized. You do it, everybody does it, but there's no translation that's recognized and able to be used in their prayers, in their services. So there was something there too. Even though I support what's going on today, I would not want everything to be in Latin, so the people who read Latin could dictate to the rest of us. I wouldn't like that either.
There was
Well,
there's
folks,
a
with
church.
that is 1:13, and I want to,
Okay, we gotta go. Okay.
one final comment. Go ahead, Cindy.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say there's a church in Italy, and I can't think of what it is. I have to look it up. But a lot of the churches, they actually did pictorial of the scriptures and everything. They did they did reliefs of telling the whole Bible story in pictures on their
Right.
walls of the church.
That's why there was so much art in Roman Catholic churches, because it was a way of communicating the biblical stories. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I can't remember what church. There's a church in Italy, like the whole front of it is nothing but the whole story of the
A
Bible.
timeline. It's a timeline.
Timeline. It's
That's-
pretty
The
fascinating.
Sagrada Familia is doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And with modern art.
Okay. Fun stuff, right?
Yeah.
Good stuff. All right, people. I will see some of you this week, because there's